Hey there, fellow commuters and go-getters, and welcome aboard the Express Train to Success. Coming at you from the heart of hustle culture, I'm your conductor of candid conversations and snappy insights, Macy, and this is none other than the Office on Avenue M podcast.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
We're about to dive headfirst into the maze of entrepreneurship and career journeys while being human, which happens to feel like a really hard thing to do at the same time for some reason. We'll be cruising through the stations of personal growth, career strategies, mental health, PR prowess, and creative direction, all while unraveling the enigma that is office politics and why you hate your job that just so happens to be your own freaking business sometimes. If you don't know me, I'm Macy. I've got over a decade of experience in the media business trenches, and now I'm the owner of my own creative communications agency, and we've helped tons of brands reach national media prominence. I'm talking Forbes, Essence, Good Morning America, Bloomberg, the whole gamut, but I'll get more into my resume later. I've got stories to share, lessons to impart, and a refreshingly unfiltered take on all of the things. We'll dissect it all, from the sweet symphony of success to the less melodious moments of being misunderstood in the workplace. Consider this show as your stop for solidarity. I hope you feel seen.
The next stop is
Doctor's Orders, the reality about CEO depression and burnout.
The content presented in this episode is intended for general informational purposes only. This podcast is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. It's important to consult with your own healthcare provider or a qualified medical professional before making any decisions based on the information shared on this podcast. Sensitive subjects like suicidal ideation will be discussed in this episode. Some may find these topics triggering. Listener discretion is advised.
Just like those unpredictable subway delays, life's disruptions can lead to the most unexpected destinations. This destination was entrepreneurship. And although it wasn't exactly in my plans, it just happened, and I stepped up to the plate. And doing that was one of the most significant and rewarding decisions I've made in my career and life. But if you ever wanted to know what it feels like to feel like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders as the face of an organization, the mentor for several team members, and the facilitator of both their livelihood and your own while battling depression, I could tell you, because I did it. Not well, but I did it. Depression is just another thing that just happened, and I wasn't ready for that either. When you're a depressed CEO, I can tell you that the stakes are high. It's like standing on the rim of an active volcano, and each decision you make determines whether you'll be consumed by the fiery consequences in the pit of hell or find a way back to safety. It feels like if you lose everything, so will everyone around you. And yes, it will be your fault. It feels like if you don't win this battle, you're not cut out for leadership. If you can't show up, the legacy you're building will collapse, and that will be your fault too. And if you can't come up with new ideas, you can just kiss it all goodbye. You feel defeated. It's like being trapped in like a labyrinth where every wrong decision brings the walls closer and closer together, and they're just threatening to squeeze the life out of you. In a generation where entrepreneurship has been romanticized, it's so difficult to share with friends who aren't business owners that maybe you just don't want to do this anymore. To them, I was living a dream. They couldn't conceptualize why I'd want to walk away from something that I've built. My fellow business owner friends that I had at the time felt like drones stuck in this hustle culture vortex of doom that tells everyone to sleep only when they're dead. And that's over. They didn't get that I craved rest or I felt disconnected from my work. To them, it was a lack of dedication and passion. If they did get it, they were not going to make it known that they got it. I've even had some peers of mine deny depression even exists. I couldn't explain to those people that I was having trouble getting out of bed for weeks and that I wasn't like jolted by the need to succeed at 4 a.m. to go to a freaking gym class. My family didn't have any tangible advice. None of them had taken business that far. My dad did some entrepreneurship stuff, but it wasn't a wealth of knowledge from my family. And I wouldn't dare tell my team because you're captain of this ship. It was incredibly alienating. You feel like you're on an island of shame just all by yourself. And what I learned is that I couldn't be vulnerable with anyone. At one point, this was the exact life I wanted, but in that moment, it was the very thing that was just making me miserable. I could distinctly remember being invited to a Christmas networking event, and I normally just kill those things because I got charisma and like the social chops and all that. But I was feeling so uncomfortable. Every time I was introduced to a new contact, I just cringed because I didn't actually want more clients. I wanted to connect with people, not prospects. And I guess that wasn't good for business. So I snuck out of the back door, hyperventilating. So I was able to take a few months off from my business to just regroup, and I bounced back stronger than ever. But not everyone has that luxury. There are varying degrees of depression, and here to unpack that with me today is board-certified psychiatrist Dr. Margaret Seide. Welcome, Dr. Maggie, which I'm used to calling you because Dr. Seide and I used to work together for quite a long time. Let me give you her background really quick. Dr. Margaret Seide is board certified in psychiatry and neurology. In addition to her operating her own private practice, she's part of NYU's Department of Psychiatry. She is part of the 2% of Black psychiatrists in the United States, and she's dedicated her career to destigmatizing mental health in the mainstream realm. Today, her office is situated just steps away from the New York Stock Exchange, where she helps Wall Street's elite financiers, bankers, and lawyers come to seek confidentiality and unburden themselves in their process to their high-pressured lives. Today, she has been featured in top-tier publications like Self Magazine, Healthline, NBC, New York Post, Insider, CBS, Good Housekeeping, and many more. Again, welcome.
Hello, Macy. It is so good to see you again. So good to hear your voice. I know that you came for business because in glancing over some of the things that you wanted to talk about, the topics that you wanted to address, the questions that you have for me, I know this is a topic you've thought about and that you really relate to and understand, and that you really want to get some thoughtful tidbits out there for us.
Unfortunately, I relate to it heavy.
Mhm.
But it was so important to me to have an expert perspective on this subject matter because I could just talk about depression and talk about burnout with other CEOs and not offer any tangible solutions or real understanding of what it is that we're experiencing and how to navigate it. So I just thought it was important and responsible to have your voice in this conversation.
Right, right. And I think it's also honest to admit that depression is not exactly like other illnesses, as far as there is still a stigma. It is still sometimes viewed as a weakness. It does challenge the self perception of some people. And so we need to talk about it honestly from that perspective. And we can't quite just talk about it like the flu.
No, you're not.
Yeah.
Facts. So I guess a very important question, which is to start this whole conversation off, is what is depression? Okay, so pause. The natural place for me to start this episode was asking the doctor to define what depression is, but because she's a doctor, her definition was a little complicated. So just as a baseline, I wanted to provide a really bare bones definition from psychiatry.org, and the definition might be a little bit too bare bones, but hear me out. According to psychiatry.org, depression, major depressive disorder, is a common and serious medical illness that negatively affects how you feel, the way you think, and how you act. It then goes on to say that fortunately it is also treatable. Depression causes feelings of sadness, loss of interest in activities you once enjoyed. It could lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and can decrease your ability to function at work and at home. But once you hear Dr. Seide's answer, you're probably going to think and understand why I'm saying it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that. So listen in on her clinical definition of depression.
Depression is defined, we have as psychiatrists, we have our book, the Diagnostical Statistical Manual, and it's on its 5th version. A new version comes out every year since the 1970s, and it defines our illnesses. So what is the definition of major depression from the perspective of our book, our textbook. So from that perspective, we've got our 5 major symptoms. Medical school students remember them with the mnemonic SIG-ECAPS, which stands for some of the major symptoms, including suicidality being one of the big ones. I want to mention that there is suicidal ideation. There is a person not necessarily planning or intending to harm themselves, but thinking, I wouldn't care if I didn't wake up tomorrow. That we also include that because Suicidal ideation with an intention and with a plan is actually quite rare. We also categorize something called non suicidal self injurious behaviors. We might be familiar with young people, often teenage young women who cut themselves. But I've known people who verbalized it as things like, I just went through a red light last night just to see because there's something about me that doesn't care. Or I know I should be taking my insulin, but I don't even care. I know I'm going to feel awful. Even things like I'm hungry, but I'm not going to care. Of course, if I had a guest or if my children were here, I would be working on it. So that's a thing that I want to encompass, because if we just focused on a person who is like writing their suicide letters, we might be missing other things, or a person might think this doesn't apply to me. So then there is lack of energy, just feeling always lethargic, sleep. So it can be insomnia, or I slept 18 hours, but I still feel tired. I want to mention something very specific because sleep disturbances come from all sorts of things. But there's something that we call early morning awakening, which is a particular type of sleep disturbance, pretty particular to major depression. And this is when the person might fall asleep okay, but at some point in the middle of the night, usually early morning, like 1, 2, 3 a.m., they pop up. And it's almost with a sense of alertness. Sometimes it can be at the exact same time, like between 3:12 and 3:15, my eyes spring open and the person cannot fall back to sleep for several hours. And it rarely responds to your run of the mill sleep treatments, or it doesn't really respond well or consistently. So this is the closest thing. Again, it's so specific and particular. When people had clocks on their dresser, they would be able to see, say at 2:03 every day, my eyes pop open. So if someone has that, that's our almost our equivalent of a blood test or an X-ray for depression. Because
Oh my
obviously,
gosh, Dr. Maggie, I had no idea that was a symptom. I
yeah,
thought it was just sleep apnea because for a very long time, like between 3 and 3:30, I would wake up.
no, sleep apnea is more spread out and it's a more particular feeling, because this is like feeling like good morning, except it's not quite morning, as opposed to sleep apnea is more sprinkled and it's more like a startling because of the breath thing. I posted about it once on Instagram and a lot of people were like, that thing. So if you have that symptom, again, not just I'm having trouble sleeping, that might be a good sign to talk to someone.
Okay, so I feel like you've so far delved into some symptoms,
Yeah, and
but
then appetite's another one, social withdrawal. So those are like if we were to make the checklist and treat it like any other illness, like do you have a cold, do you have the stuffy nose, the fever, the cough? That's our list that is the equivalent. But obviously there is the lived experience that like that's just the framework and we go from there. That people experience it differently, and they might experience it as anxiety, as I don't want to go anywhere, I'm no longer interested in these things, my confidence is gone, I can't make decisions, I'm crying and I'm not sure why, and I'm sad but I'm not sure why. And I want to distinguish that from sadness, as in the general sadness that we all experience from time to time. But sadness is in relation to a thing, a trigger. As in, I cannot find my wallet, I'm sad. I had a loss of a relative, I'm sad. As opposed to, I don't know why I've been sad for 3 days and I really couldn't tell you. Now my mind is latching on to different things to be sad about. Like now I'm rumbling about the rude barista from 3 weeks ago. I'll find a thing to be upset about, but that's not the same as direct sadness, which is not an illness to be treated. It's a life reaction.
right. I like that you made that distinction between just being sad and actual depression it's a condition, right? Before we even go any further, I had a conversation with someone recently about depression, and they brought up just feeling like, you got to just shake yourself out of it. And there was this strong sense that they felt like being depressed was almost voluntary and something you have complete control over. So I really think it's important for you as a professional to delve into the chemical nature of what goes on someone's mind when they're actually experiencing depression and how much control they have over that when it reaches a certain point.
Okay. So now, because we were just talking about early morning awakening, how much control do you think someone could have over that popping up at 3:13 every day?
Well,
Again,
I know they don't have much because it's been me.
none, right? So
Right.
that means it is an illness. There is so much documentation about the physiology of depression that if you have diabetes with depression, it will change. And everyone knows that your blood pressure can go up from being stressed, that it is an illness. If you measure it, your blood pressure will have gone up. You did not choose that. It changes your wound healing time. It is we those couples who've been together for years, one person dies, the other person dies a few weeks or months later. Did you know that you can actually track that with EKG, something called EKG? There is something called a broken heart.
Wow.
So the people who are like, it's a thing that you can shake off. Now, something real can happen to you. You can have a real illness like diabetes, and you can make choices about how you manage it, and there are better choices and less better choices on how you manage it. But it does not mean that it is something you can shake off.
Yeah, I think
So,
it's so important that you make that distinction.
yeah,
Because frankly, I'm tired of having this conversation that
yeah.
people just want to be depressed and for it.
But it's still out there because it isn't something that you can see or measure. We still like to think of ourselves in a certain way. And our brain really does us the favor of sort of pumping us up every day in order to get us through the day. And so we don't really, there's a natural tendency to not want to think about our flaws and to sort of overestimate ourselves in some
Mhm.
areas. And there is a thought of that depression isn't real because it is something that you cannot see or measure. You cannot see physically how it holds you back. And it should be something that you should be able to grab your bootstraps and do something about it yourself. But that might be true of sadness. Like, I am sad, but I am still going to show up to work, show up on the feed my kids. Those things might be true, but that's just not the same of the total collection of symptoms that we call depression. And it's also tricky because we are also trying to toss around the term depression without sadness, because sadness isn't always something that people register. They'll
Mm.
tell me about the 313 thing,
The three,
but
oh yeah, your
but
symptom.
the feeling of sadness is not something that we connect with. We're always trying to push it away.
Yeah, a lot of people are in denial of that. They view it as weakness, especially the population we're going to be talking about today. In this part of the conversation, I asked the doctor to kind of outline the difference between high functioning depression versus the depression that we kind of all know. And she was really responsible in her answer. What I learned is that high functioning depression is not exclusive to Goldman Sachs, finance bros, and CEOs. You can be a high functioning depressed person as a PTA mom, a cashier, a caregiver, or even a student. So she thought it was really important to establish that it's not something exclusive to just CEOs. So many of us have to show up regardless of how we're feeling, but our episode is focused on CEOs and those in leadership positions, so just keep that in mind while we're having this discussion. What she did say is that how we cope with depression is less to do about the severity of it and more to do about the person that we are. She could probably explain better than I can. Listen.
So there's the illness, and then there is the individual that the illness lands upon. Because there might be someone who is like still at work even though their fever is 102, and someone else who's at home because their fever is 101. And that might depend on who are you, your level of resilience. But the caution of that is sometimes it is you come from a lot of trauma, so you have a lot of pain tolerance. You can keep chugging. But yes, it might also be true that you had a very firm foundation with a very firm upbringing. So when the things start to happen and the wind starts to blow, you can keep going. You can still show up for the exam or show up for practice the next day. But rather than thinking of it as like mild, medium, and severe depression, I would say, again, that's not irrelevant. And we also do make that we distinguish that in the DSM. There is something called major depression as opposed to other forms of depression. But I would say the most relevant piece is who did it fall upon and what are those pre-existing factors. And a firm foundation, a firm personality, some stoicism, some get up and go, some I don't feel like it, but I'm still going to show up, some follow through because you were just given that or handed that or raised with that, and you're from a stable home, has a lot to do with success. Because we all know of people, of lots of famous examples, known wide and far, and in our own life, where this person had everything going, but they just crashed and burned right after the contract or right after the first Grammy or the first, and then of course in our own lives, because you, not just talent or IQ or being able to bounce a ball, it has to be combined with the right temperament, a certain amount of self-discipline, and a certain amount of emotional stability that probably in truth happens from age 0 to 5.
I was just thinking that. I'm like, okay, so I could blame this on my parents. Not
Well,
ent
let's
not
just say if you've
entirely.
got a 4.5-year-old, get
Those
going.
formative years really do set you up for your grit and your propensity to experience depression or navigate it, it sounds like. Is that what
Yes,
you're saying?
yes,
Okay.
yes. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Okay. But for the sake of this particular episode and this audience that I'm reaching, we're talking about people who are in leadership positions. And I particularly want to talk to you because you talk to a lot of
Mhm.
them folks. All right.
Yes.
And they have their own unique experience. And I do appreciate you making those distinctions. Those are important, that we're using the right language and we're not discounting the experiences of others just because they might not necessarily be a CEO. But I want to talk to you a little bit more about how burnout and depression, or both things, or manifest in leaders. What are some common traits you see when people who have high powered positions and their symptoms, if you will, that are patterns?
So I would say particular to leaders would be a resistance to accept it. And it's hard to address, change, work around something that you refuse to acknowledge. Going back to, I don't want to be the person with depression. I cannot turn it off. We don't choose our prejudices. And there is a prejudice floating around about a person with depression. If I say professor, an image pops into your head of what that is, or waitress. And if I say depression, an image pops into your head of maybe a sad person on a couch in a not so clean robe, or a person who's not killing it. You don't picture CEO, gold medal winner, Grammy award. That's just, if we're honest, if we were doing like a fastest word to come to your head, depression doesn't, you don't picture someone on stage or someone giving their TED talk or getting their novel published. So there is an association with vulnerability and frailty, and it's not that those things are good or bad, but we don't like to claim them necessarily, and we tend to think they're the opposite of whatever it took to get here.
Yeah, to be a leader. I guess that kind of leads into my next question. That is why this subset of people are so good, or tend to try to hide their emotional struggles, because it's not associated with the image that they created of
Right.
themselves
Right.
and for how people perceive them.
And you're used to, speaking for myself, my journey of becoming a physician, you're used to studying when you're tired. You're used to being the last one on the dance floor. You're used to, like, giving it up and like really trying and going past like everyone else stopped here. I cannot do any more. So I'm going to study for one more hour. And so
Hmm.
you're kind of used to fighting yourself and winning enough to be successful. And that's all a successful person is. I kept fighting myself and I won 51 times rather than 49, that I didn't succumb to my desire to not work out or not keep studying or not try again. And so you're used to fighting yourself and being successful and winning. You're used to fighting yourself and winning. And so you think this is one more battlefield.
There was a stat here that was from Fortune 500 that said about 50% of CEOs are depressed at some point in their career. Does that surprise you?
No, there is a personality type that the general, what we call introvert, and that we also the quality of conscientiousness and
Hmm.
being a people pleaser that some people have more of and less of. But successful people tend to have more of introversion and conscientiousness, as in I am very hard on myself. I want to, I'm not going, and by people pleasers, I mean, how to not yell back at your boss, or like those cool, like I'm chill, I know how to chill in this room and I know how to chill in that room. Those are also, again, qualities that tend to push people towards success or find themselves in associated with a Fortune 500 company. But again, all of those qualities have a B side. And being an introvert, being very, very hard on yourself, obviously is hard because you fail a lot when you try a lot.
Yeah.
And you don't want any failure. You want to win 99% of the time. And that's what keeps you trying again and going for more and more. But when it means more, I mean, the people on little league field or at their neighborhood softball are not as disappointed when they're losing as when people winning or losing the Super Bowl. The stakes are higher. You've climbed more, you've worked hard, you've been dreaming longer, you put more in. And so your losses are more painful. And then also oftentimes on that level you have other people relying on you, whether it's your family, your responsibility, people that you might financially support. I remember that Jay Leno actually spoke about this also, speaking about his depression, how he did not want to make room for his depression or even treatment for his depression because his show, his industry, he fed 200 families. And so I cannot sit down and acknowledge my sadness because it's not just me at stake anymore. And by
Right.
the time, again, you climb to a certain way, you might feel that way. And again, for certain positions, like let's say at a point where you have surgeries or patients, then it really feels like I do not have time to be depressed and to go for help or to make room for the vulnerability.
Because I think leaders oftentimes have a special sense of isolation in their roles because
Mhm.
everyone's looking to them to be the captain of the ship. And it sounds like you're saying your advice to them would to be honest with themselves about what they're experiencing and seek professional
Right.
help.
And to be honest about the pitfalls of being you. If we were to list the qualities that make a great CEO or that makes, we can assume your average gold medalist has, and that I'll say that I have had or had to have, rely upon, cultivate to become a physician, most of them have another side, a dark side, as in it has the fact that you're willing to outwork everyone else, that you have high demands on yourself is good. And then until it's not, because you're not willing to give yourself a break, to make room for your inadequacies or your vulnerabilities, and to acknowledge that you can't do everything on your own.
Mm.
So acknowledging that you've got this quality. There's an A side and a B side. And if you don't watch out for the vulnerabilities built into the fact that you are extremely hard on yourself, you're not going to be able to fully enjoy the other side.
Hey, just chiming in. So if you heard my episode with Brittany Antoinette about being a burnt out CEO, you might have the natural question, well, is depression the same thing as burnout? And I did ask the doctor this, and what I found out is that burnout is not actually a clinical term defined in the DSM-B, but she's thought about this quite a bit, and she's come to the conclusion that she believes that burnout is a particular type of depression, and it doesn't just go away when you clock out of work. So listen to Dr. Seide describe how burnout from work can bleed over into your regular life and become the depression that we know and we defined a little earlier.
So depression being an illness, it means that it doesn't entirely depend on your external environment, right? Because we said sadness that is not an illness is related to a direct thing. So we know most likely everyone in the funeral is sad because that's our environment. We're at a funeral. And we're reacting to that. There are people who were like, my life is pretty good. I do not know why I am depressed. I don't have things bad. So it is not a one-to-one correlation with your environment, because that would be just called sadness, or I have a job interview, so I'm anxious, or I broke up, so I'm sad. Those are reactions as opposed to the illness. Now, something environmental can cause a depression. You can be tipped over into, I was sad about my divorce, and now it's bled over into my sleep, my appetite, my energy, my desire to hang out, my ability to enjoy this movie. Now it's bled out. And now it's lasting quite a while because I got divorced 2 years ago. So now it was an external thing like a divorce or a foreclosure, and now it's tipped over to here. I think that I would describe that burnout as the particular type of external factor that tips us over into, it's bled over into anything. I'm not
Yeah.
happy at 5:05 or by Friday night. I'm still not upset. I'm
Yeah.
still not joyful. And it's so now I know it's not just, oh, work is stressful. It's turned into a full-blown burnout.
Right. Yeah. If you're depressed, should you be in a leadership position, right? Some people think like, oh, he or she's not up to the job, they're not in a position to lead right now. But it sounds like you're saying if managed, you can continue to meet that high demanding role. Is that
Yes, but also in an ideal world, this doesn't exclude treatment. Because I'm talking about the person who's willing to either go to talk therapy, take medications. Do you have to do those things? No, because research shows that yes, exercise, vigorous, regular, frequent, multiple times a week, this many minutes a week, at this level of intensity is the equivalent of antidepressants. But are you going to do it? And are you going to do it consistently, or do you need the bridge of antidepressants till you are doing it?
right?
So, yes, there are things you can do to combat it, to make yourself feel better. And I mean feel better as in actually lifting your mood. There are things you can do if you do them consistently that are going to make you feel better. And a lot of people in leadership position can force yourself to wake up at 5 a.m. and still do the thing even though you do not feel like it.
Mhm.
We're better at forcing ourselves to do the thing that we don't feel like doing. Again, 51% of the time. And
51.
that's all it is. Because you're still fighting, you still probably are occasionally surrendering to a potato chip or missing a workout, or not staying in the studio or not writing that
Learn
day.
your potato chip. That's great.
Yeah, so I mean, you slack, but again, did you do it? Are you slacking enough for it to scar your life?
So, what can we do when this happens to us? Are we going to be good? Can we ride it out? Can we still be great leaders? What happens next? let's get into what happens if your depression goes unchecked.
Because the keep going thing, the thing about depression that I'm like, no, you got to get on it, got to see someone, don't write it out, is because of what we call the scarring effect.
Mm-hmm.
After 6 months of not returning anyone's phone calls or texts and saying no to every invitation, you no longer have friends. That is what
Mm.
I mean by the scarring effect. After
Oh,
surrendering to emotional eating and lack of energy, if you do that for 6 months, even when you're feeling better, now you're still left with the thing of how your metabolism and size. That's what I mean by the scarring effect. After you turn down your boss's invitation to give a presentation 6 times in a row because you didn't have the confidence, the energy to work on your presentations, you now are left with the scar of whatever that's going to do to your career. So having the illness and minimizing the impact, and so that you're not walking on the path that's 3 degrees to the left, but now you've walked on that path 3 years. Now your career, your relationship, your body, your home, your savings account, your friend circle are all a little bit different, as opposed to the person who forced themselves to work on the presentation, make a salad, go to the dinner party, shake the hands. Yes, that person is going to have less of an impact in their life. But and that's true of, okay, diabetes has landed in your life. Are you going to be losing toes a couple years from now? Or are you going to be making YouTube videos on how to live a vibrant life with diabetes? It's a real illness, but we know that there are different ways to manage it. And we know that that person who's like, what is everything and anything I can do to change the course and still have mastery over my health with this illness, that person has had to do things that they didn't feel like doing. And most CEOs, leaders, professionals have just done more often the things that you didn't feel like doing and maybe that no one feels like doing.
does it go away if you leave it alone?
Uh, so the textbook definition of depression, yes, there is on average, it lasts about 9 months, but it could last longer. As in, there is such a thing as a person falling into a depression, having the checklist of symptoms, never getting treatment, and eventually coming out of it. Yes,
But
that.
it depends on the person, the severity, and things like that.
Yes, for all of the above. But again, that person might still now have no one to talk to because they spent these months not engaging with anyone. That person still has been giving 50% effort at work, at their career. And so now your boss is never going to think differently of you. You might not be able to eat that or outrun that.
Right.
So that is why if you sat and waited it out, it might go away. But again, if you are a college student or who's trying to get into law school, that might injure you in, indefinitely.
Right.
So,
Absolutely.
so that's what I mean by doesn't go away. You
And
could wait it out, yes, but there is, again, we use the term scarring on a person's life.
okay, so are there steps that high achievers can take to prevent the onset of depression or burnout in their careers?
So I would say a level of awareness. I would say, again, if the thing, if I were to be honest, right, no one could really argue that there is no substitute for a personal trainer, right? A personal trainer has a purpose, but you can't really argue that. To be perfectly honest, I would say the same thing of psychiatrists, therapists, and antidepressants. I cannot argue that there is no replacement for us. It's just doing the other things that could replace us, doing it consistently and in a self motivated fashion, are not easy. Most of
Yeah.
us need an accountant, okay? And there is a substitute for an accountant, but not everyone has got the mojo for it. And so things like taking care of yourself when you feel like it and when you don't, good sleep, keeping your social circle, not surrendering to do the Friday night to Monday morning hibernation weekend after weekend. Still, the other things that we know work, like daily journaling, gratitude journaling, meditation, exercise, and the lifestyle things, feeding ourselves, interacting with others, getting sunlight. There are vitamins that we know are important. And I'll just throw out probiotics and fish oils that are good for our brain. If you're aggressively and progressively and diligent in those things, you can outrun your depression. That is true.
That's
Again, but it takes that level of awareness and it takes a level of consistency. We all know if you go to the gym 3 months, 3 times a month, nobody's going to care, and you're it's not going to help you with maybe anything except maybe meeting a guy at the gym, but
yeah.
it's not going to help you with anything. So is there something you could do? Yes, all of the above things. Aggressive, progressive, daily radical action is a substitute for antidepressants, talk therapy, but again, it takes a level of awareness and commitment that most people have to be average, that they might not have intuitively or on their own.
I mean, what I'm hearing when you say that is it's the willpower thing, and that's part of a symptom of depression is losing the willpower for a lot of things.
Yes,
For many people, at least I find that. So that is why I, not a doctor, would say go to talk therapy first and tandem with all the other things, you know?
I would.
Um,
Being honest with yourself is like not everyone will go to the gym unless they have a personal trainer. You need an accountant. You need a maid. You need a this. You need a babysitter. You have to be honest about the things that you need. Some people need these external factors, and it's not necessarily wise to keep denying yourself of the things that you need. We talk about physician burnout a lot, and of course I hear about it a lot. I think that's because of COVID, but also because of we have a quantifiable risk factor, an outcome, and that is physicians kill themselves twice as much as the general population. Now I think that's for a lot of reasons, but I mean, this is an ugly truth, but physicians know how to kill themselves. I think that is why cops have a higher suicide rate than general population. They're obviously using guns and have access to guns. And so that's an ugly truth. It's probably politically incorrect to say, but I just want to be honest about that math part. But I don't think that is all of it at all. I think the fact that there are certain professions where it takes a long time to become the thing. And so you are dreaming of how wonderful it is going to be the thing. And so when you cross over, and I'll say physicians in particular, because you have to be really nurturing the dream and on your way, and you're not there until you're there for, I'm going to say, minimum of 12 years, but probably more like 15. You have to have a vision of it is going to be so amazing. Because what else could keep you going for 15 years except your vision of how wonderful it's going to be? So when you cross over, you're like, whew, I made it. I'm in here. And you're just looking around. You're like, wait, what? This is what it is? So a thing that you're dreaming of, that it took forever. I've been in uh, practicing football since I was 4 years old. And here I am the day after I won the championship or the Super Bowl. And I'm feeling a little deflated and disappointed. That is because there are some people where it's kind of like, I know why I'm upset. But then when you're sort of like, I made it, why am I still upset?
that was my experience.
And when you have an achievement, when you make a certain income, when you have a position, who can you complain to? That's not going to look at you like if Oprah were like, sometimes your first thing is going to be like, what? I don't want to hear your problems. You don't have any problems. Or I'm in my head going to be like, but you have this, and this, so I'm just not sure what you have to be upset about. I think those are some of the isolating things and some of the truths of like you chase after something for X amount of time with a vision of what that thing is going to be like, and that vision propels you, and then that vision may or may not match reality.
I think that has a lot to do with why so many people in these positions end up in that space.
Yeah.
Uh, well, part of it anyway.
Yeah.
I could say for me personally, definitely that had a lot to do with it. I worked so hard to get here and I'm like, it doesn't feel how I thought it was going to feel. In fact, I don't even know if I like this and everyone's looking to me to figure it all out and nah. Yeah, you said I had a question in here I kind of skipped over, but you answered it a little bit. Are there certain industries or professions where depression is more prevalent? Do some come to mind for you?
Things where it took a while to get here, or
Mhm.
things where you I thought it was going to be like that. There might be someone where like, okay, I didn't think I was going to enjoy doing this thing or doing this job. I was just doing it to pay my bills and to feed my kids. But there are some jobs that is someone else's dream job. And when you have a job that is someone else's dream job or a whole bunch of people's dream job, when you're standing in it, you feel ungrateful. And
Yeah.
and again, who can you complain to when you've got someone else would be like, well, that's funny because I would kill you to be able to do your thing that you're doing. So funny that you're not enjoying it. That I think jobs like that, but there's something about the thrill of the drive of what you did need to get to medical school that's almost a little appealing. I mean, it's horrible, but it's also appealing. Having like the flame at your back. And it's a special kind of pressure that, again, is very bittersweet, that some
Mhm.
people need it. So then there is this now, what do I do with all this energy? There is a sweetness and a beauty that I think is like it is this worst slash best thing that could befall a person to have a calling that they cannot say no to and outrun. And and trying to outrun it would be misery. And so the people or who are just like because the people who are climbing Mount Everest, I'm like, what in the world? What is
Why?
going up there? What is wrong with you? But they have their burning fire that makes no sense to anyone else. When the person's in their mother's garage with their guitar or the novelist, that makes no sense that you have to, that connection with the other side of like, I cannot not do this, that a lot of
Mhm.
percenters feel, um, that again it's a blessing and a curse, but it's a beautiful thing to be clear enough, undepressed enough that you hear the voice, that you answer the call, that you have
Mm.
confidence and faith in yourself. Because in order to write the first word of the novel or go on your first audition or whatever, there is a sense of confidence that depression steals from you. But the that dreaming, that I have faith that I'm going to make it, the oh boy, well, I'm going to buy my mom the house and I'm going to this and that. And um, it is a particular type of person, that we associate with functional depression or leadership or all of those things. But it's just that, again, there is another side. And so when
Mhm.
I'm talking to the young person, I'm like, I had to have given everything in order to do this, and this while
Yeah.
holding it together. And I don't think that's ever a bad thing. And I think that's a special elite population to be like, nope, I did not have one other thing to give. I spent my last dollar. I had 12 cents in the bank when I started that t shirt company or whatever. Like, really, I'm giving it all.
How can the people get in touch with you?
So I'm at 3 Minute Shrink on Instagram. I'm revamping that and have plans for more content, and Margaret Seide M.D.com. And it's Margaret the traditional way, and Seide.
I want to thank you so much for being here. You are always refreshing and brilliant, and I always feel inspired when I speak to you.
Thank you. Thank you. And your management of this content and your thoughtfulness and going through the questions, and you really have an intelligent bird's eye of view of this topic.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I wish I didn't have to experience it firsthand, but to be human.
That's how you know. And again, you know why.
Yeah, for sure. Hopefully, hearing this, some people feel a little less alone. Thanks for riding with us, passengers. If you found this episode entertaining, helpful, or just didn't hate it, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts so we can get those numbers up. It makes it all worth it. There's more where this came from, so you can find more episodes of The Office on Avenue M wherever you listen to podcasts. If you want to keep in touch with me, I'm at Meet Macy on Instagram. You can also reach me on my website via the contact form at www.macymedianyc.com. Don't ask me why I said www. I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there sometimes. This podcast was produced by the Macy Media team and others. I'm your host, Macy Harrell. This episode is sponsored by Macy Media, a media agency dedicated to amplifying meaningful stories to the right audiences. Macy Media specializes in public relations, creative direction, media training, brand development, partnerships, photo, and video production. Thanks for tuning in to The Office on Avenue M. And this is my stop.
Stand clear